Hello everyone. Thank you very much for coming here this evening. My name is Penny Wright. Some of you we know, and there are a few new faces, but welcome to all of you. Just want to mention a couple of things before I introduce tonight's speaker. Just while we're at it, since some of you do not live in Southampton, I wanted to invite you and all the other folks to take a copy of our newsletter if you like. The other thing is, if you live out of the library district, like in Sag Harbor, and you want to join the Friends, you can pay whatever amount you want, and you will get a newsletter every 3 months. It's a good thing to do. The Friends memberships support all of our concerts, and we have a lot of concerts. And they allow you to get the inside word on the many things that we do, because we do a lot. I can't resist just mentioning 3 films. Actually, I'm going to mention one more thing. We have a speaker coming here on June 18th, Michael Barnhart, who is a distinguished professor at Stony Brook. He's been here before. He's one of the best speakers I've ever heard, and he's talking about North Korea. So I do hope you'll come. We love reservations because we love to know how many chairs to put out, but if you forget to reserve, just come. It's June 18th. And I wanted to mention another film, speaking of films and cinemas. We are doing a screening of Human Flow. That's Ai Weiwei's acclaimed documentary about refugees on June 20th. It's long. We're serving pizza. So, pizza, popcorn, anything. June 11th, okay, I happen to love this movie, and I want to encourage anybody who hasn't seen it to see this film, Wonder. You know, you look at the posters and it's a kid with a helmet on and you think, this is maybe not for me. Trust me, come see this movie. Has anybody seen it? Do you agree? It's a wonderful movie. I think everyone should see this movie, so just trust. And the last movie I'll mention is on July 16th, we're going to show a film that I haven't seen, but it's supposed to be terrific, in search of Israeli cuisine. Actually, I think in August we're going to show I, Tanya, on and on. We usually do one a month. Anyway, today we are here because Annette Hinkle wrote a wonderful book, which, by the way, is for sale. I do want to thank someone in the audience, Pauline Newworth, who is the publisher of this book, and she's here tonight. Thank you for all of your help setting this up. Annette Hinkle, as some of you know, is a writer, a journalist, and an editor on the East End of Long Island. A former associate editor at the Sag Harbor Express, and also recently the community news editor of the Shelter Island Reporter. Annette is now a freelance writer and is contributing pieces to the Southampton Press, the Sag Harbor Express, and other publications. East End, Worldwide, you name it. Annette has written about the area's cultural scene and has also covered environmental issues as well as politics. Over the years, she's won multiple New York Press Association awards for her work. She is a longtime regular on the Media Mavens, a weekly radio show hosted by Bonnie Bryce in Southampton. And Annette lives in East Hampton with her family. With the help of the Sag Harbor Express, the John Germain Library, and local residents' memories and photos, Annette and her publisher rose to the occasion in just a few weeks to put together a beautiful collectible tribute to the town, the area, and the cinema. She says in her dedication, the book is also for the people of Sag Harbor, and by extension all of us, for whom going to the movies has long been a defining feature of life well lived in a small village. Please welcome Annette Hinkle.
Thank you, Penny, and thanks for coming, everyone. So I guess everybody knows this iconic image of this cinema. And this book was born probably about a little over a year ago. I think it was after the major fire that took out the cinema in December of 2016. And Pauline contacted me and said, "Why don't do you want to do a cinema book?" And I'm like, what could there possibly be to write about this little cinema that was in Sag Harbor? It turns out that we found a ridiculous amount of stuff, and we spent a lot of hours up in the Sag Harbor Express offices just opening random volumes and finding all sorts of interesting tidbits. So the fact that we put this book together in probably less than 2 months, there's a lot of stuff we probably never found. And as a matter of fact, there's some surprises that I didn't get into the book that have since surprised me. So that's why doing this presentation is good, as I can update you about what I know that didn't make it into the book, which came out about a year ago. So of course, this is the cover of the book. Now this is what Billy Joel said on stage at Madison Square Garden. I just want to say goodbye to the old Sag Harbor Cinema. This was on Friday, on the next night after the fire, so this was Saturday, December 17th. And then he launched into a Cinema Paradiso with the music from the film that is about a theater that burns down in Italy, of course. So on the morning of December 16th, 2016, this is what a lot of people awoke to. This massive billowing smoke coming out of the cinema. It was very odd. It was early in the morning, and I just remember my husband came upstairs, and I was in the bedroom, and I thought, he's going to tell me something not good. And it was that Sag Harbor was on fire, which is a pretty standard thing in Sag Harbor. If anybody knows Sag Harbor history, it's been defined by fire, and this was just the most recent one. So about 19 companies from the East End showed up at this fire, and then it was, by the time I got there, this was what it looked like, big black smoke coming out. These are all Michael Heller photos. Michael Heller is the photographer for the Sag Harbor Express, and he's also a fireman for East Hampton, so he always has the best fire photos. And it was just this black acrid smoke. You didn't know what was burning. And just imagine all the fabric and things like that in there. Here's a good view from the back. You can see this is behind, if anybody knows where where Sacktown Coffee is, this is the back of that store. And the fire started on that deck where the water is spraying, and then it spread to the cinema, which is directly next door to that building. And it's all being rebuilt now, but it did not look good that day. It was about 16 degrees out that day and a really strong wind blowing from the west. So when the fire was out, this is what Main Street in Sag Harbor looked like last December. So while this was the last theater that we had in Sag Harbor, it was not the first. And it turned out during the course of our research, Pauline and I discovered there were no fewer than 7 theaters that showed movies in Sag Harbor, which is kind of crazy when you think about how small a town it is. So the very first theater that actually showed movies was this one. Now this is the Athenaeum. It was built in 1817. Originally it was the Presbyterian Church. And it sat where, if you know where the Bolivar watch case factory is and where the new townhouses are, it sat at that corner. So the Presbyterians built this in 1817, and then in 1844, of course, we know they got their spectacular new Old Whalers Church right up the road. So they sold this church to the Episcopalians, who stayed in there for a while, and then the Episcopalians in 1881 sold it to the Masons. So it was the Masonic Lodge. This building's had a lot of life to it. And then finally in 1900, Joseph Fades, who owned the watch case factory, he bought this building, not because he wanted to run a church or a theater or anything, but because he wanted the land for his factory. So he moved it 1 block to the south, and it lived in the parking lot of St. Andrew's Church. That's about where this building sat. And then that was when it was turned into a community center. And it's sort of interesting. It was overhauled. It had an auditorium for 500, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. This is 1900. They put in a stage, and they put in a box office. They had a bowling alley and dressing rooms. And so they would do a lot of Thanksgiving pageants, holiday pageants, local plays, traveling vaudevillians would show up there. But the first experimental film was shown there in 1907. And that was the first screening that we knew of in Sag Harbor. Actually, the Athenaeum was another victim of fire. In 1924, the furnace caught fire and took out this entire building and about 15 houses with it. It was another windy night. It's been a complete fire destructive sort of town, and so a lot of these theaters ended up going up in smoke. But it was interesting that, so after the book went to press and we said 1907 was the first film in Sag Harbor, I was proved wrong by a man named Jack Youngs, who knows everything about Sag Harbor history and did not tell me this little fact. His family owned the American Hotel going way back, and he showed me this little ditty, which is fascinating. If you look there on the right, you can see Masonic Hall. It says Edison's projectoscope. So Thomas Edison's projectoscope came to town in 1898 for a demonstration at Masonic Hall, which would have been the Athenaeum. So yeah, Thomas Edison was, it shouldn't be much of a surprise because Thomas Edison was very eager to maintain his patents when it came to the film industry. And he got his hands in everything. You know, he had a studio up in Cliffside Park, Inglewood Cliffs up there in New Jersey is where his first films were made. And he also was very busy making film equipment and trying to control the industry as much as he could from the ground up. So Edison was very ruthless when it came to suing people over infringing on his patents. And it's funny, we think about how California became the hotbed for Hollywood and the film industry. But from what my research showed me, a lot of that was because of the fact that people were trying to get away from Thomas Edison. And they figured if they went to California, he wouldn't have his lawyers after them so easily. They could get away with infringing upon his patents. And if it got really bad, they were right by the Mexican border and could just slip over and escape the grasp of Thomas Edison. And ironically, of course, his son ended up living in Sag Harbor. He owned the Hannibal French House. I don't know if anybody knew that later in life. So it's sort of funny though that Thomas Edison, even in 1898, was already getting involved. So this is there's two other theaters that were running around the same time as the Athenaeum. And it's interesting because we don't have any photos of them. We could not find any photos of them, and we're still sort of looking and hoping that something turns up. So this is actually the Arsenal building. That's no longer there. This is right by the entrance to the old Whalers Church. So you're kind of looking up East Union, kind of toward Main Street. And that's the old burying ground behind it. So this is the Arsenal, this building that was obviously not too well used even then. This is probably from the early 20th century, but there's a lot of posters, vaudevillian posters and things like that, which was sort of the entertainment of the day. Movies were, at that point, were of course very silent and very short, and probably not all that interesting. So it was almost as if the film sort of supplemented the main entertainment, which was your vaudevillian acts. And the two other theaters that were operating at the same time in the early 20th century, at the same time as the Athenaeum, was the Montauk Motion Picture Theater, which was located on Washington Street, and that's right by the Bull of the Watch Case Factory there. We're not exactly sure which side of the street it was on, because again, no photos remain, but that operated from 1908 to 1912. And they showed illustrated songs, which were basically a piano player and slides, and that was like their sort of early film. And they did a lot of vaudevillians. They had this guy named Samson the Great, who one time showed up, and out front on the street, he held teams of horses trying to pull them in different directions, which must have been thrilling. And then up the street, we had the Star Theater. That was located probably around where DJ Hart is now, a couple stores north of the IGA, and that operated from 1909 to 1923. And then speaking of fire, which we always do when it comes to Sag Harbor, they had a fire in their projection electrical booth in 1913, which was interesting. This was a really common problem in movie theaters back then because nitrate film, of course, and humidity, heat, dust, all of that stuff conspired to make the stuff explode. And so projection booths were very, very unsafe places. And this one, that's actually what caused the fire in Cinema Paradiso, is the nitrate film. So this Star Theater, they had to shut down for a few weeks, and they had to rebuild, and they put the projection box on the street side, and they made it fireproof to protect the audiences. But I don't think that the projectionists themselves had much protection. So it was a really hazardous job, and as films got longer and they had to change more reels, it got more dangerous, which I think is kind of interesting. So But as you can imagine, on a really hot day in the summer, I'm not sure, like very stifling theater would be where anybody would want to be. And the owners of the Montauk Motion Picture Theater understood that. So they did a really interesting thing, which I had never heard of before until we researched this. And they had something called an air dome, and they said it was on Main Street. I'm guessing this was up on probably Ashtabula Park. And an air dome was sort of an early drive-in theater, an outdoor sort of thing, but without the cars, of course, because it was not quite at that era. So I found a photograph. This is actually an air dome in Brighton Beach, which I think is an awesome idea. So normally what you would do, like a lot of them would have little walls around them, like picket fences, and then they would have the projection booth is there in the back, and then the screen is up front, and you put all these seats out. And because it's silent, they don't have the difficulties of trying to, worry about sound. And then behind the screen, a lot of time, they would have the refreshment area where you could go behind the screen and have your refreshments, and they would put a live band back there, so you'd have live music accompaniment, which I thought was great. And that's my goal, is to recreate an air dome somewhere in the near future. But it was brilliant because that was the way to get people to come to the movies when it was completely stifling out. So all summer there was air domes in Sag Harbor. I don't know when the tradition died, but I think it's a pretty awesome one. So the next thing I want to show you, this is a really interesting slide. This is going to be the location for the next 4 movie theaters in Sag Harbor. And if you see that little white awning, just to the left of it is 90 Main Street. And that's where all the cinemas that were to come would live, including the Sag Harbor Cinema. So this postcard is, I think, 1910. So 4 theaters will occupy this space over the next 101 years. The first one was called George's Theater, and that was functioned from 1915 to 1919. And George caused quite a scandal when he opened his theater, because not because of the movies he showed, but the fact that he was open on Sunday, which was incredible sacrilege in those days. And then in 1919, the Elite Theater came in. That operated from 1919 to 1927. And at that point, it was expanded. Now, this is insane when you think about the size of Sag Harbor. They expanded to 700 seats and then 300 more in the balcony. So that's a 1,000-seat theater in Sag Harbor. So they've been in a new world at Sir Morgan, because as the film industry was progressing, these theater owners had to just keep upping the ante. So the organ was the big thing in the early 20s. This is before the talkies. In 1924, the owner took out the first row of seats to put in a basketball court and a dance floor. So, it's almost like you're hedging your bets. Like, nobody was really that interested in putting all of their money, I guess, into this new technology, especially with Edison patents floating around. So they were kind of hedging their bets, it seemed. And then the last theater before the one that we knew was Glynn's Sag Harbor Theater. And this operated from 1927 to 1935. And it kind of marked the beginning of small local change. So this guy named Mike Glynn, he had theaters, and I think he owned the Southampton Theater back here, Patchogue, Bayshore, and Greenport. And he was the one that showed the first talkie in Sag Harbor, which was a film called Kitty in October 1929. We know what else happened in October 1929. And then in 1932, he built the huge Southampton Cinema. That's when it was supposedly beautiful. I've never seen some photos of it, but it was probably pretty amazing before it was subdivided. Everyone said that was the most amazing theater out here. But he was sort of an entrepreneur. He had these little cinemas all over the place, and some big ones too. So this is interesting. We relied a lot on parades in Sag Harbor, and thank God there were a lot of parades in Sag Harbor, because that's the only way we ever get any pictures of the cinema. And this parade I thought was really interesting. This is the Armistice Parade of 1918, and 1918 was a really interesting year for the film industry, because many cinemas had to close for 6 weeks or more because of the flu epidemic, and there were quarantines in a lot of places. I know New York, I don't think had a quarantine, but Los Angeles did for a month. All the movie theaters had to be closed, and even things like funerals, people weren't allowed to go to funerals. They weren't allowed to go to big assemblies, anywhere where people gathered. So as a result, the Hollywood production industry decided that summer that they needed to go on hiatus and stop making movies because they didn't want to make products that weren't going to be able to be seen anywhere. So, so studios didn't want to pay for films that nobody would see. So just wondering, I mean, it seems odd that George's theater shut down in 1919 when he sold it. So I'm wondering if maybe that flu epidemic had anything to do with the demise of his theater, although we don't find any evidence for that. A lot of this we're just sort of surmising just based on what's going on. So a lot of films got shot in Sag Harbor over the years. And the first one that we know of is this one called Back Home and Broke. Yeah, interesting. I think it's a guy who leaves home, goes out, strikes it, he's broke, he goes out, strikes it rich, and then comes back to his hometown and pretends he's not rich to see if his friends are nice to him without any money. So I'm not sure, again, it's a silent, I don't know, I can't imagine how sitting through one of these might be today. It would be interesting. But this was a 1922 Paramount Pictures film. The cast stayed at all these local rooming houses around Sag Harbor. The movie was released in, and it was shown at the Glenn's Theater. So that's a picture of the cast, courtesy of Joe Markowski, who's a big postcard collector, when they were all hanging out at the Sag Harbor Yacht Club. So another film that was shot in, anybody recognize these people? Right? Okay, this is Clark Gable and Carol Lombard, of course, in No Man of Her Own. Shot in Sag Harbor. It was shot at Lynn's in March of '33, and the interesting thing about this, the opening scene is coming down Sag Harbor Main Street. There's a still of that in the book. And the thing that's kind of fun about this is that it was said that Clark and Carol Lombard fell in love in Sag Harbor, and they were both married, not to each other, of course. And within a couple of years, they were together. And they're saying that their romance began in Sag Harbor, and not just anywhere in Sag Harbor, but at this place, the Bayview Hotel, where you get chicken and duck dinners, and apparently a lot more. Does anybody know where this is? Any guesses?
America.
No, you'd be good guess, but not. It's actually where the Suffolk County National Bank was, now People's United, down on the other side of Seine. That where that bank was a little on. Yeah, so that was the Hotel Bayview. So that apparently was where it all began for Clark and Carol. Of course, yeah, it is no more, unfortunately. So, like I said, we love a parade in Sag Harbor because it always gives us a chance to see the theaters. Here's the Elite Theater, you can see in the background. These are firemen walking up Washington Street. Sort of fun. And this picture kind of confounded us. I kind of zoomed in on this, but it confounded us when we first found it because we thought that Elite Theater was actually advertising that's where the theater was, but this was really like a dry goods store, and that Elite Theater sign is actually a billboard advertising Westerns. And I think that there's a little gentleman crouched there at the bottom of the sign. I don't know if you can see him there. But it's interesting, so this whole idea of films taking off and starting the big Westerns, and Hollywood was getting more creative with what they were showing. So this is on the corner of Washington. You're looking up Washington Street there to the left, which is now where Kaplan has the bank. No, is it Chase? It's Chase now, yeah. I can keep track of all these banks. So we had our own little celebrities in Sag Harbor. So here's a picture of a few of them, local talent. So up on the upper left corner, you have actor Robert Edison and his wife Maude Irving. So Edison appeared in a film called Big Jim Garrity, which was actually shown at the Athenaeum in 1916, and he appeared in person. And at the screening, he lived in Actors Colony. That's why that area in North Haven is named Actors Colony. A lot of these guys moved up there. And to the right of him is William Farnham. He was another Actors Colony summer resident, and he was in a movie called The Bondsman in 1915. And part of that movie was actually shot in North Haven, and they brought in apparently like a whole little fishing village, and they recreated this whole scene there, which was great, and that was close to home, so I'm sure he loved it. Now the woman in the bottom left, the reason we put her in here, she's sort of a local celebrity, and to me she kind of represents the ending of the vaudevillian era, how movies took over, and all of these performers that used to travel through Sag Harbor, families would come through and they would do their acts for as long as they were paying crowds, and then they would move on somewhere else. So movies kind of killed that whole industry. And Fanny Tunison is a really interesting character. She lived on a little tiny house in Sag Harbor, and she was born, or was paralyzed from the neck down as an infant. And ironically, she ended up supporting her entire family because she learned how to sew and to write and to paint and to draw, all using her tongue. She would embroider. She could do all of these amazing things with her tongue. And she eventually ended up going on the vaudevillian circuit. And you can find references to Fanny Tunison in New York Times and papers on the West Coast. And she did fortune telling and card reading. And she died. She was born in 1867. She died in 1944. And this was always really funny because we have a photo at the Sag Harbor Express of Fanny Tunison in her chair. That workbench she's sitting in, her father built for her so she could do all of her work from that. And we were always fascinated with Fanny Tunison, and there wasn't anybody around that we knew that knew her. And one day this older woman called and said that she had all these memories of Fanny Tunison and wanted to talk about her. So our eager young reporter grabbed her notebook and ran out and went up to this woman's house. And by the time she got there, the woman had no clue that she had called and did not know who Fanny Tunison was anymore. So unfortunately, yeah, and she's buried in Oakland Cemetery, but she was seemed like quite a lady. So quite an interesting character. A lot of those in Sag Harbor. So the next person I want to introduce you to is this fellow. This is John Everson, and this was, I think, one of the most surprising things that we found out about the Sag Harbor Cinema is that this guy designed it. And John Everson was, they called him, as you see, the Valentino of cinema design. He lived in the Midwest, and he did all those atmospheric theaters that maybe some of you have encountered, these giant 5,000, 6,000 seat movie palaces where they look like a Moorish courtyard with stars and clouds that go across the top and of the ceiling, and that was his thing. And he just had all of these designs. He traveled the country and built tons and tons of these. And it was interesting that this is the guy who ended up designing in 1936 the Sag Harbor Theater. And I think what's really interesting is that the 20s were all about the big atmospherics, but then of course what happened in 1929. So by the 30s, everything had changed, and you'll see that in the next couple. I wanted to show you a couple of these shots. These are really interesting. So this is one of his former theaters. This is the Lowe's 46th Street Theater in Brooklyn. In recent years, it was used by a furniture company. So it was an Italian. It was built in 1927. I think it was an Italian design. On the first night that it opened in 1927, 25,000 people showed up to get 3,000 seats. You can imagine. So it was designed to look like the night sky in an Italian garden. It had a projection of clouds, but by the 1940s, the atmospheric effects had stopped working, and they weren't used anymore. And then in the 70s, in 60s and 70s, it became a place for rock acts, like the Grateful Dead played here, Jefferson Airplane and the Byrds, and then by 73, they shut the whole thing down. So in recent years, it was used by a furniture dealer that just stored, you can see all the chairs down there, he just stored his stuff there. This theater was actually demolished in late 2015 to make way for condos in Brooklyn. But here's a couple other shots. You can see the amazing statuary. So this was a movie theater, isn't that crazy? Look at that, pretty nice. So fortunately, we have a couple good examples that we can still show you. This one, for example. This is the Akron Civic Theater, designed 1929 by John Everson. It was a Lowe's theater, and it's one of 16 remaining atmospherics in the U.S. that were designed by Everson. And the Akron, I think, was the last remaining of the 11 opened by the Lowe's company. It seats 5,000 people. Obviously, they use it for, I think, more than just films now, too. They use it as a stage. So if you're ever in Akron and you don't know what to do, I would go there. I'm from Ohio, I'm allowed to say that. So I'm very impressed that they have those there. So it's supposed to be a Moorish castle, this one. It has Mediterranean decor. You have your medieval carvings and antiques, and I think it's the one of only 5 left where the sky actually still works and the stars twinkle and the clouds move. So the next time I go home, I'll have to go stop by there and say hello. And this is the lobby of that theater, right? Isn't that crazy? So this is the guy who designed our little Sag Harbor Cinema. But again, all right, this is 1929. This is 1936, right? So by now the Depression has taken hold. This is another one of my favorite pictures. This is the schematics of the actual Sag Harbor Cinema design that Everson did. And you can see how, everybody knows how narrow that space was. You can kind of see where the little retail space was in the front, the narrow corridor. So the thing that's interesting is that this theater sort of represents the new model that took hold after the Depression set in, which was, the whole Art Deco, streamlined, very spare, very, nothing fancy, no adornment. So whereas those atmospheric theaters had those giant lobbies that were like opera houses, the Sag Harbor Cinema just had that little narrow corridor. And the other big change in this cinema design was the idea of concessions. The theater owners could no longer just make it by selling tickets. So they, all the Epperson theaters, he had about 4 or 5 Art Deco designs. He also did the Greenport Theater, by the way, which has been, I think, subdivided many times. But they installed a concession area. It was all of these machines. You buy your popcorn and your water and your candy out of machines. There were no live people serving popcorn. So it sort of represented the new way that theater owners could kind of make money as they were trying to survive the Depression. So that's the design, and this was a great find. This is my friend Del Cullum, who lives in East Hampton. Some of you might know him. He's a very active guy in the community. This was his grandfather actually built the cinema in Sag Harbor in 1935-36. So this is the construction of the main part of the cinema box going up, and it was actually a fireproof box, which may in fact have something to do with the fact it didn't burn on the day the fire happened. It also happened that the wind was coming out of the west, blowing the fire away from the actual cinema. So that actually survived. The box is still there, and the seats and everything. Here's another shot of that being built. And when it was finished, here's what it looked like. And I just love that little ticket booth out front. I don't know what happened to that, but that's kind of a charming little thing. Little stoplight right there in Middle Sag Harbor. Is that an extension cord running from it? Yeah, I guess that's why they took that out. So the opening night for the Sag Harbor Cinema was June 3rd, 1936. This is the full page ad that was in the Sag Harbor Express that day. So we had little Shirley Temple doing Captain January. Tickets were a whopping 40 cents, 20 cents for children. You had to buy in advance. So this sort of ushered in the whole new realm of Sag Harbor, and the cinema really was a community place to go. It wasn't just movies, but they would have talent shows there for St. Andrews, which was the precursor to Stella Maris, the Sacred Hearts, the Academy. They had, St. Patrick's was a big day for talent shows. You had all these kids would show up and show off their talent, and there were these little ringer girls who always won every year because they were incredibly famous. And does anybody know these kids? The Moylan sisters? Yay, there you go. So these are Sag Harbor's claim to fame. Everybody that we interviewed who was over a certain age in Sag Harbor just said the Moylan sisters were it when it came to fame in Sag Harbor. So these two little girls, Mary Ann and Peggy Joan, were born in Sag Harbor in the early 30s. They went to St. Andrews Academy, and they were taught to sing harmony by their father, who was an engraver at Bolivar. By the age of 7 and 5, they had a weekly 15-minute show on NBC radio. And they were on the Horn and Hard Art Children's Hour, and they plugged a dog food named Thrivo. In December of 1936, they made their big screen debut with Backyard Broadcast, which was a two-reel film that was produced by Warner Brothers and shown at the Sag Harbor Cinema, and they made their appearance there. So the thing that's great about them is at the height of their success, the radio show was second in popularity to The Shadow, which is pretty major. And they performed on through the war years, but they stopped singing when they were adults and sort of settled down to private lives. Mary Ann died in 1990, but Peggy Joan just died at Southampton Nursing Home last September at the age of 85. But I have a little clip here of them singing.
Brought to you by Thrivo, T-H-R.
I'm sorry, let me go back there.
Every Sunday as the stars begin twinkling in the sky, the little Moylan sisters, Peggy Joan and Mary Ann, are waiting for you. These cherubs of radio, America's youngest harmony team, are brought to you by Thrivo, T-H-R-I-V-O, Thrivo Dog Food.
The Thrivo is very much alive, full of pep and bins. If you want a peppy pup, you'd better hurry up. Buy Thrivo for him.
So the Sag Harbor Cinema was really a lifeblood of the community. I have more Moylan sisters if you want to stick around. I have it all queued up up if you want to stay. So this is I think another one of my favorite photos in the book is we had heard some of the old timers saying that they did beauty pageants there, and we're like, what? Are you talking about beauty pageants? And I finally reached a woman whose sister was indeed Miss Sag Harbor in the early 1950s, and here she is, Irene DeSanti, and here she is with Harry Fick, who was the theater manager for many years. This photo is, the early 50s. That is not a real girl next to her who was angry. It's a mannequin, I discerned. So I know, it looks really weird, right? But Harry Fick he is like the lifeblood of the Sag Harbor cinema. He ran that cinema with an iron fist, and when you went in there, everybody said that if you were a smoker, you sat on the left-hand side of that cinema. The adults sat in the middle, and the rowdy kids had to sit on the right. And if you were a girl who didn't like to get jujubes thrown at your head and you moved to the middle, they would come down with the flashlight, shine it in your eyes, and make you get back over to the other side. They were very strict about that, and they had student ID cards, and then if you were caught cutting up at the movie theater, they would seize your ID card, and then you had to answer to the student council on Monday morning when you got in. So they were not joking around. He also, by the way, managed the drive-in in Bridgehampton. So he sort of split his duties, but everybody said they were always nervous about when Harry came down the aisle with a flashlight, you were in trouble, because a lot of the usherettes were just teenage girls themselves. Can you imagine trying to control some of those kids in the 40s and 50s and 60s? So that was really when Sag Harbor was at the height of its popularity as a cinema. That's where kids went all day. They would spend all day there. Oh look, another parade, and look what we get to see in the background. So that's another great image of the cinema right there from that angle. Love the parades. Here's one of the lobby cards that advertises a movie that was playing. April Gornick from the Sag Harbor Partnership had quite a few of these. There's a lot of interesting memorabilia floating around. So those of you who had not been in the cinema, and you'd be surprised how many people I talked to had never stepped foot in that theater, or if they had, there was one woman, it was sort of this locals versus the newcomer kind of thing, where once it became an art cinema in the late 70s, a lot of the old timers didn't go there. I literally spoke to a woman who had not been there since Rosemary's Baby was a new film. So you do the math on that one. Very interesting dichotomy there. So this is the main area of the cinema. There's the candy counter with the very suspicious popcorn that came in big plastic bags from nobody knows where. Very suspect. And this is another one of my favorite pictures. I don't know if anybody remembers when this was what the Sag Harbor cinema looked like, but for a while we thought that this might have just been like somebody just added the dots in Photoshop or something. But then I found another picture of it in black and white in the Sag Harbor Express archives. I'm like, no, they didn't do that. So we're thinking this photo probably mid-60s. Of course, it had to be a Volkswagen. They all look the same no matter what year. So that's what we're guessing. The Harbor Bakery there, that burnt down in 1977. Another fire. That was the fire. There was a diner next door to that. That's where that fire began. That's what created that shopping cove that we know today where the steps are. So we believe that the dots, the best we can determine is these dots went up in the early 1960s. We found newspaper reports that due to the theater owners, they were planning on closing down the cinema for the winter because, of course, by the late 50s, early 60s, television had come along and people were not going to the movie theaters like they had. So the owners of the theater, which was Prudential Playhouses, they wanted to close the theater down for the winter season of 60 and 61. So there was a big village board meeting, and they brought in the early Chamber of Commerce to see what we can do, and they decided that if they were going to stay open, they needed the community to start going and support them. So it stayed open. It closed for a few weeks, but tried to stay open mostly on weekends until that summer. So the idea, from what I've heard, is a man who used to work at the cinema said that it was the idea of the Wonder Bread came from this guy Leonard Edwards, and he was a VP at Prudential Theaters, and he also owned the East Hampton Theater. And he thought if he painted the theater to look like a loaf of Wonder Bread, that children would be attracted and want to come to the cinema. So we also talked to another Brad and Bruce Breyer, who were legends in Sag Harbor, and they used to have a music studio in that building next to the bakery, and they would climb out the window and go up on the top of the cinema, and they would drop water balloons on people, and because it made it look like the dots were falling off the building, which they thought was pretty funny. So that I don't know when that was painted over again, but a lot of people don't even remember the dots being there. But it was interesting, around that time that this job was done on it, there was another interesting thing going on in film, which was that the Catholic Church had gotten involved in rating film. So I grew up Catholic. I remember getting the bulletin every week and what movies had an A, which was acceptable, to C, which was condemned. And of course, everybody that I knew wanted to see the C movies, just wondering what they were about. So there was a C movie, a condemned movie. This was before, the Motion Picture Association of America came out with its regular rating system. So if a movie had a C rating, the Knights of Columbus would typically go down, and if this theater was showing those movies, they would go down and picket in front of the Sag Harbor Cinema if it was a condemned movie, and they would try to dissuade anybody, especially people who go to the church with them, to go see the film. So Harry Fick's daughter remembers that when they were doing that, the parishioners who wanted to see the movie would just go around the back, and Harry would let them in the back door so they could avoid all of that. So speaking of movies that were condemned or close to it, does anyone recognize that? Yeah, there you go, the Lolita. So this is Sue Lyon from Lolita, and this is Bert Stern, the photographer's famous shot of Lolita. And what you may not realize about Lolita is that this picture was taken in Sag Harbor. So this is the 1961, and it turns out that Stanley Kubrick, who of course directed Lolita, worked at Look magazine with Bert Stern, the photographer. Then they both went their separate ways and got careers. So it turns out that Stanley Kubrick goes off and makes Lolita, but forgets to do any publicity stills of Sue Lyon. So he calls, after the film's been shot, he calls up Bert Stern to say, hey, could you shoot some shots of Lolita for me? And Bert Stern said, sure. And so he takes, it's sort of like a Lolita story in itself. So he brings Sue Lyon out to Sag Harbor. She's 15 years old. And to his dismay, he said her mother came along. But the thing that was interesting is that he had just finished reading Nabokov's book. And there's a lot of references in the photography that sort of metaphors for what was the language in the book, which is sort of like catching a reflection of a young girl in a window or in a mirror. So a lot of the shots that he shot for this series were of this. So this is Lolita, Sue Lyon looking into a rearview mirror. The fun thing is that those heart-shaped glasses and that lollipop were bought at the Sag Harbor variety store. The glasses were 39 cents, so I don't know if you can get anything there for 39 cents. But they were never in the film, they were only in that. So I threw in a couple other shots. I had done a story for the Sag Harbor paper last summer about Bert Stern's. I talked to his widow, so she gave me, I have a couple more shots. This is one of the outtakes, and that's Bert Stern's handwriting there. That's great. That was shot at, most of these were taken up at Pearson High School. This one is a great one. Now this is the front porch of the American Hotel. And that's Sue Lyon. That was one of the outtakes. Ted Conklin actually bought a print of this. It now hangs in the hotel lobby. If you go up there, you'll see that. So yeah, this is 1961, long before Ted Conklin owned it though. So this is, I don't know if anybody remembers seeing Margaret, Mrs. Martinson, Aberpost. She was the ticket taker, and this is my friend Ann Schlotsky took this picture. She just thought that was for her station. She was always there. So in July 1968, United Artists bought all of the Prudential theaters, including the Sag Harbor Theater. And up through the 70s, the theater showed a lot of first-run films like Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid, and disaster movies like, remember Roller Coaster? Anybody remember that movie? 1977. It was one of those sense-around ones where the theater would shake, and I had a friend who worked there, and she said it would run from 10 a.m. until 11 at night on a loop. And that it drove, and there was nobody in the theater, so they begged the projectionist to just turn the sound down, so they didn't have to listen to it when there was nobody there. But it was interesting. So there was, at this point, some United Artists, I think, was faced with an antitrust suit because they had too many theaters. So this is sort of where that era of chopping up movie theaters began. And UA had to sell off a lot of their theaters. And I believe that that's probably why they sold the Sag Harbor Cinema to Jerry Mallow. Sag Harbor was probably too small to divide, unlike Southampton, which was huge, and they've got a lot of cinemas in there. But in Sag Harbor, you only had about 500 seats, so that may be why they sold it. So in 1978, Jerry Mallow was able to buy the theater. The first film that he showed was Madame Rosa, which was a French film, and over 300 people showed up for that screening. And he'd also owned the Greenport Cinema, and he's like, there's no way people would come to see that movie in Greenport. But in Sag Harbor, he just found this whole new crowd. So that sort of ushered in that whole new fans of documentaries and foreign films and things that were a little bit more offbeat and a little rarer. So I wanted to give you a couple. This was the projection room, right? That's when it was cleaned up. I have to confide with you. I was in here yesterday. This is still there. I was able to, with one of the people from the partnership, go in there and we poked around. And believe it or not, the theater is fairly intact. It smells just like it did. So it's no worse for the wear. You know, that moldy, musty smell. And you access this room by a really straight, scary ladder. So I took some photos here. I'll have to show you those at the end of this. But the next big thing that happened in Sag Harbor and for the cinema and the life of it was the Sag Harbor cinema sign. I don't know if anybody remember this episode. This is 2004. So Brenda Seymour, who was Roy Scheider's wife, was coming out of yoga one day. Here's Brenda, and that's Jerry Mallow with her. So the story is she was coming out of yoga in 2004, and she saw the old Sag Harbor sign coming down, and in its place was this plastic sign that Jerry had made that was going to go back up in its place, and she was just not happy about it. So Joe Pintaro, who just passed away last week, was there too, and the two of them came down to me at the Sag Harbor Express and was like, what do we do about this? Are they allowed to do that? I don't know. It's called Chris Leonard from the ARB, and he's like, they can't do that. They don't have approval for the sign. They went on and on. So we got a landscaping truck because the guys who were taking the sign down were going to take it to the dump and throw it away. So Brenda said, if I can get a truck here, can I have it? The guy's like, yeah, you can have it. So we got a landscaping truck, and we took the old letters and parked them on the back lawn of the Whaling Museum for a while. And a few hours later, Brenda said a cop came to her door, and she was accused of stealing the sign by Jerry Mallow. So she said, how about if you drop the charges in exchange for me helping you to raise money to build an appropriate sign that completely matches the other one. So they came up with a deal, and that's what they did. So over the course of the next year and a half, the Wharf Shop was collecting pennies from kids. People were making all sorts of donations. The SAG portion of the sign was sold for $30,000 at the Bay Street Gala, with $15,000 of it going to this theater and the other $15,000 to the sign effort. Brenda said it took about $50,000 to raise the money to refabricate the new sign, partially because the first $8,000 went to the guy that made the plastic sign to then left town with it. So it cost quite a bit, but in the end, it was all happy. Look, there they are shaking hands. It was a huge day. It was October of 2005, and they blocked the street off, and there were bagpipe players, and the whole town turned out for this sign raising, and up it went. And here's Christy Brinkley's house with the SAG. It lights up apparently still, so that's the old SAG, the original letters. You can buy the house too apparently, but I can't, but maybe you can. So that's where I think where theater really became, like, it belonged to the people of Sag Harbor. So on New Year's Eve 2014, the local musician Brian Downey hosted a fun New Year's Eve night out at the Sag Harbor Cinema. That's Jean Merkel dancing. She's really fun. She dances all the time. And they had art exhibits, and they showed kids movies, and it was just a whole day of festivities. And really, but at that point, Jerry was already thinking about selling the cinema. Probably in early 2016, he put it on the market for $14 million. And interestingly enough, that the Sag Harbor Partnership was already talking about a deal to buy the cinema for $8 million, and they were supposed to close on December 28, 2016, and then the fire came. So I was there that night. This was weird. So this was the night of the Sag Harbor Express Christmas party at the American Hotel, and we're in there talking about the fire, and then somebody from the village office came in and said they're taking the facade down, because what happened was it was starting to list. You could see it was definitely leaning toward the street. So I happened to be there, and I happened to shoot this. That's what happened that night. They were very gentle, I have to say, even though it doesn't look good. That was exactly what we did. Well, the good news is it just so happened that the guy who designed that sign, the refabricated one, happened to be, he lives like way up island, happened to be having dinner that night in Sag Harbor. So he came over, and Chris Denman from Twin Forks Moving and Storage was there, and he's like, I have a truck, I'll get the sign. So he actually carted the sign off, so it actually was saved. I mean, so the Sag came out pretty good. The harbor is a little messed up there. Here's some other pictures of the fire. You can really see how bad it was, right? That's that part in the middle is the cinema part. Here it is from the other side. So here's where the sign is right now. It's at Twin Forks. And there they are with it. So this is sort of an interesting picture. This was right after the fire was put out, and this was a year later. So there we go. So you can see there's already been some progress made. So I wanted to show you what I found when I was up there the other day. So this was interesting. Here's stacks of film. That's actually a TV radio. I didn't even know these existed. Apparently the projectionist would so bored he would just tune into TV channels. You could listen to TV channels while you're showing the movie, which I thought was hilarious. This is like a weird time capsule. Like nothing has been touched since the night of the fire. This is one of the films that never went back. It's called Things to Come. Isn't that interesting? That was the movie that was played at the play that night, and it's still sitting up there. And I think the partnership is still getting bills from rental company for that film. And here's this is the schedule for that week. You can see the date of it. Here's some old projection, like editing equipment. And this is like, I thought, a great find. Behind the movie, behind the screen, we found this box, and this was in it. It's one of those Sag Harbor student ID cards. Can you believe it? 1956, 57, you have to get your teacher to sign it, and this is what I guess they would see is if you were bad in the theater. It's hilarious. So at this point, here's what the new theater will look like. So at early January, the Sag Harbor Partnership was able to close, and they actually bought the property for $8 million. They had a $1.4 million state grant to purchase the cinema property. I think Billy Joel gave $500,000 to have the popcorn stand named after him. So there's other people who've gone in to help with the purchase price. At this point now, their plans have been approved, and they are just waiting for a little more money to come in. But I was talking to Nick Gazzola, the head of Sag Harbor Partnership, and within the next 3 weeks, they're planning on pouring the concrete footings in the pad to get started. They were trying to avoid disrupting the neighborhood because the businesses there have had such a hard time in the last year to do all the construction. So they figured they'll get the concrete laid out, and then the cinema box is still there, but then they can use that concrete as sort of a staging area and work from the back. So this is the latest design for it. It was originally going to be a 2-story design, but they realized that the Compass building, which is now going up to the north of them, is a 3-story building. It's much taller than it was, so they were able to get approval to add a 3rd floor to the cinema. So the plan is to take the original screen, leave it the same size, but divide the theater in half along the back. So you'll have 250 seats facing the old screen, and then they'll build a projection booth in the middle, and then on the other side they'll have 150 facing the other way. So you'll actually have 2 screens on the ground floor. Upstairs, they're talking about having a cinema right there, like 50 people can sit there, and maybe spaces for galleries and art shows there. Cafe on the ground floor where the D'Amato Gallery was there, and lost about $20 million of artwork, by the way. And offices probably on the top floor, so they're hoping to get going soon with that. Here's a side view of how those 2 cinemas downstairs would function. So this picture is by Carl Gretzky. This was painted about a week before the cinema. This was the Grading Gallery in Sag Harbor had a bunch of Russian artists come and paint scenes around Sag Harbor, and this one artist set up right there, which I thought was amazing. So this was literally done about 5-7 days before the fire. This is a Bob Weinstein picture, which I just love. And finally, I don't know, I just always love that picture. So. I don't know what it says, but it just does. So there you go. So. Any questions? Oh.
In the original schematic, right at the beginning, it looked like the theater was straight back. But the theater roll the seats going over to the.
Well, if you didn't see the schematic only shows you to that particular schematic only shows you to the wall of the entrance to the theater. So what you're not seeing is the whole back part, but we just we liked the whole image of that, with curved front, so that's why. But yeah, so what you're seeing was from the front to the actual entrance to this thing. But it's shocking how little room there is back there. When I went into that projection room, the wall is like right there. There's no there behind that projection area. Yes?
In your research, did you see any historical reason why Sag Harbor was attractive to performing artists? And did that include Azurest?
I think that a lot of the reason was because it was a factory town. So I think, you have to remember how many people were working at Bulova, and then you had like the Bliss Torpedo Factory, and then you had Sag Harbor Industries, and there were all these little, especially like after in early 1920s, a lot of factory work. So I'm thinking it was a fairly prosperous, as far as population, a lot of people lived in Sag Harbor, and I imagine a lot of families in Azurest too had jobs at the watch case factory, which by then was owned by Bulova. So that was the only thing I could figure out for to justify the amount of, in the early days, these theaters were having shows 7 nights a week. So, I mean, there was also no television. So I guess that they were kind of starved for entertainment.
But how about the performing artists themselves among the population?
I don't think I think most of the ones that came through were traveling, performing. They would do like a lot of, we found evidence of like kind of like pageants and maybe homegrown skits, where local people would perform. But they weren't national acts, but there was, I think, a lot of community theater of that kind that went on in these places, which is why they would show film one night and then they would turn it over to, the Lions Club or whatever the equivalent was back then to do their shows. There was a lot of local talent, I think, who graced the stage of the Athenaeum and all these other places too, I believe. Yeah.
The gentleman that owned Sag Harbor and the theater in Greenport, did he also own the Madison Theater?
I don't believe so. I think that he only owned Greenport and Sag Harbor. But he sold Greenport not long after he bought Sag Harbor. And then, because the Greenport Centennial was divided pretty quickly thereafter. What's great about him is that he's kind of, he never wanted to pay a lot of money for anything, which in a way is what preserved the cinema. Like you go in there and, it's, I mean, honestly, like the wiring and stuff, I'm surprised that, things didn't go a little bit earlier. But yeah, I mean, it's just like pristine. I had a friend that worked for him, and he would send him down to Puerto Rico to like try to buy equipment from like the front movie theaters in San Juan where the vines were growing through them. And he's like, there's nothing here. Trust me, there's nothing here. So, but he had one of the last 35 millimeter projectors too. I remember at the Hamptons Film Festival would show movies there because there weren't too many. I think the UA had gotten rid of all their legitimate 35 millimeter projectors. Everything was digital, but he still had one of those. So, yeah.
So Manhattan just lost the Lincoln Center Theaters, and they're going to lose the Sunshine. So my question to you, do you see Netflix and Amazon Prime and this like home theater concept killing Sag Harbor, which I pray does not happen?
I think because you have the heavy hitters involved in the Sag Harbor cinema that you do, that you're probably not going to see it happen there. They're not going to be likely to show first run shows that you're seeing at like Southampton and East Hampton. I think they're going to do a lot more like curated events. They have the woman who's on their board is from the Venice Film Festival. So I think that they're going to do like I don't know if any of you have gone to any of the great screenings they've had over the winter, but they showed like Chicago, and they brought in the director of Chicago to talk about it. When they had Julie Andrews talk about one of the films that she was in. So I think that is more the model that they're going after, is they may show films that are not brand new, but maybe would do like maybe they'll do like a Robert De Niro series or something like that, and then try to get someone like De Niro to come and speak. So I think that's really the model, and then also maybe education up in that smaller screening room. That's why they wanted to get 3 screening rooms, so they would have some flexibility in maybe renting out one of those. Maybe the 50-room screening room could be rented out as a classroom, or somebody could teach a master class up there in film. you know, you can do film history. So I think that that was their idea, is to try to be as flexible as possible, knowing that you have things like Netflix and Hulu kind of doing in the movie industry. So I think it's the UAs that are probably kind of nervous now, though, right? Any other questions?
I want to mention that the library has an oral history collection, and in that collection there are interviews with people who knew a lot about the one gentleman who was one of the early projectionists at the Southampton Theater, and we collected information about the Southampton Theater, so if you're ever interested, get in touch with me, and we'll give you the transcripts or email them to you. But it's said that I'm a little bit sad that they won't be doing the same kinds of films.
Maybe they will give over to, you know, maybe they'll have, you know, the foreign films running on one of the screens, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the thing, they could do that. That's the beauty of having those three options, you know? You could show the films that Jerry Mello was showing and the independents, and I think they'll probably, because, you know, here's the other thing, is nobody out here is offering those now. So I think they do see a niches being able to offer some of those foreign and independent films that you could only see in Sag Harbor, which is really kind of sad.
That was so special.
So, does anybody want to see the Moylan sisters again? I have a video of that. If you want, here, I'll play it. You don't have to stay if you don't want, but they're just so cute.
Now there are two girls from the wide open spaces where men are men and mothers make you wash behind your ears. The Moylan sisters. So join me on my little buckaroo. Why the light of western skies is shining down on you. Don't you know it's time for bed? Another day is through. So go to sleep, my little buckaroo. Don't you realize, my little buckaroo? It was from a little acorn that the oak tree grew. And remember that your dad was once a kid like you. So go to sleep, my little buckaroo. Soon you're going to ride the range like grown-up cowboys do. Now it's time that you were rounding off a dream or two. So go to sleep, my little buckaroo.
Don't get Mello though, right?
Okay, so I think that Annette will be around for a few more minutes, but we will formally end. I wanted to mention that the Southampton Historical Museum were our co-sponsors of this program, and they have given Annette a beautiful bag. And we at the library have a tiny little gift for you. Annette, this is a wonderful program, and I have to say, your book is kind of a collector's item.
And maybe you can do a second edition
And we-
make some change.
Right. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for just a wonderful talk, Annette.